Okay. Yeah. Again, to those who weren't in Estonia, you missed the meeting, but you're not missing the talk. Because I have written in the abstract that this is an update of the talk. We didn't finish the paper last time, so this time we hope to do it. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the stable, the declining, and the increasing results from 50 years of swans in Denmark. Where I'll first briefly talk about the midwinter census we've had regularly since 1968, when we started with complete national census of swans, look into distributions, and then I'm going to zoom into some Buick swan sites again, because it's the more rare species in problems, and I'm going to explain some declines there and present some hope for the future. So I'm working here together with a lot of people that has been contributing over years. But where it all began, that was back in the 1960s, when Denmark, as the first country in Europe, started using the combination of aerial surveys and land-based counts from volunteers to create a complete map of the distribution of warspurs. And it resulted in a doctoral dissertation from Anders Jonsen in 1974, which is still for us a book we take again and again. And I have an issue that is very worn out, and two that isn't. I can still have some years going in this. And if anyone is interested, all these publications are now online, although it's an old house journal of our institution. So this is just a summary map from his work back in those days, where he showed where the concentrations of mule swans were in Denmark, with bigger concentrations in the southeast, in Roskilde Fjord on Sjælland, and down in the west coast of Jutland. Sorry, and perhaps I could use this one. So around the western Jutland fjords, down in the southern part of Denmark, and around Roskilde Fjord, some of the sites that are still important, some of the sites that aren't. Now, if you take all the years we've been doing a complete national census, they are here, except that we also have a 2020. Numbers are not completely finished, but it won't change the picture. We have a very stable population of mule swans wintering in Denmark, because we'll come up with more or less the same number in 2020 when we get at the final numbers. Since 1987, we've been using a suite of sites that originally started off with 48, became 49, and now it's about 100 sites. We've actually worked up data backwards to 1987, and we do annual indexes based on these sites, and there again you see a very stable population of mule swans in Denmark. The only thing you might wonder is what's going on there. Well, actually, we had 5 very harsh, severe winters with complete ice coverage of most of the Baltic in Denmark up to 1987. So from 1978 until 1987, we had 5 of the winters were very severe. That's when I was in high school. We were going over to buy ice cream because we thought it was great fun. It's minus 27 degrees out here. We had to buy ice cream. So what don't you do in lunch breaks when you are a student? Now, as I showed you yesterday, Cooper swan numbers have gone in one direction from this is actually only started in 86, but anyway, up, up, up. And then I'm talking about the declining, and all of you would say, that's nonsense. They're not declining anywhere. There's no evidence at all of a decline in the Buick swan numbers. And how can you say that? Well, I can dig deeper and I can go back. Now, these are the summary maps of Cooper swans and Buick swans from Anders Jonsen. And in those days, you could see that he had sort of 5 sites of any significance on the west coast. He had a single island, lake in Sjælland, which were important to Buick swans. And I'm going to look a little bit more into the details of these two major fjords out there, coastal lagoons. This is an example of a midwinter 2016 map of Buick Swans. Now you can see there are some Buick Swans in Denmark, but they're actually not out in the fjords. They're in the hinterland of the fjords. They're around the restored lake down there, and then there are a lot down in here in southern Jutland, which is a complete new different thing happening. We now nowadays know because we've just the last month been looking into habitat use of a lot of data we've collated over years, that these Buicks, many of them are feeding on maize, corn, which is a new habitat in Denmark. It's being used to make silage for cattle, or it's being used to make green petrol for cars, so to say. So it's a new habitat, and apparently energetically enormously favorable for the swans. I can't remember if anyone has done energetics on maize feeding swans, but Kevin Clausen, former PhD student of mine, he made a study where he looked into pink-footed geese, and he actually showed that when pink-footed geese were feeding on this corn, they could cover their daily energetic needs within 4 hours of foraging. Where we've been used to have more or less have the understanding that geese that were grazing on grasslands, they needed more or less all the light hours of the day to cover their energetic needs. Now they can do it in a third of that time. So obviously very important for the birds. Another thing you can see, this is another map. This is a November 15 census map. Again, 1,300 swans. You can see that those sites that are hatched, they're actually designated protection sites for Buick swans. And if you remember the other map, less and less of the swans are actually where they're supposed to be protected according to European legislation, because they've left these sites. So what is the trouble with these sites? I'm first going to talk about Ringkøbing Fjord, and Nissum Fjord, that's the other one up there. There's a lake in between there, which is sort of used by swans moving between these sites historically. The trouble with some of these estuaries in Denmark is that they have a very large backland, hinterland, with a lot of agricultural activities, a lot of people living there. And that means nutrients running out to coastal lagoons. The oldest reserve we have in Denmark is the Tiberne Peninsula. It was established as a reserve in 1928. And actually, we have regular accounts of waterbirds since 1929 on that site. And that's where that's why I can say it's the declining. These are the historical records of Buick swans in Tiberne on the reserve. Of course, there are years where the numbers are comparable to what they have been some years ago, but also there are records of 5,000, 4,000, 3,000 birds very regularly in the 30s. In those days, we know also from botanical studies that it was completely stuffed with charophytes, which we know is something swans really like. Then it became more fresh, or then it became eutrophicated. And one of the troubles we see then is that these are estimates of the total amount of biomass, that's the green bars, and what we've seen in that area when we got eutrophication, and managers tried to say, we'll do something with salinity to see if we could make a better situation in the estuary by getting some salt-tolerant mussels into the lagoons so they could filtrate the water and we could get rid of the algae blooms. In theory, it worked because water clarity became very large, but in the beginning, it was a disaster for the staging waterbirds in the area because all the Potamogeton that was in the lagoon in those years disappeared because of the salinity shock, so to say. But it's been recovering since then, this is only up to 2010, but I can tell you that it's still in a fairly good situation, although we this summer realized that the amount of vegetation in the fjord has been reduced by somewhere between half and 1/3 of what it was 3 years ago, because the salinity is now regulated by a sluice, and they had some troubles, technical issues, which meant that suddenly they couldn't control the salinity. And then you're in trouble. If you want to settle eutrophication issue in a coastal lagoon by playing around with salinity, you really have to make sure you can actually do it, manage it, because nature don't accept that that's 3 months we can't manage this, because then suddenly salinity becomes very much more fresh. So that's been one of the issues. Now, if we look at, we've been looking into a lot of the water bird populations, and these are data from the 70s up to the 2010, where you can see all the bars, that is number of bird days spent in the area, so accumulated number of birds staging per day over the autumn season. And what you can see is that all these species that somehow depends on the vegetation that is coot, it's pintail, mallard, shoveler, not really the same picture, widgeon, mute swan, and Buick swan. They've been going up and down with the vegetation, but generally the pattern for most of the species are down. And what you can see is that when it comes to the trend for Denmark as a total, we don't have these declines, and therefore we can conclude that it's not a general problem for the population. It's a local problem in this lagoon. And for many of the species, we have quite strong relationships between the number of bird days and the amount of vegetation in the fjord. But the good thing is that, as I showed you before, that the vegetation status in the fjord has generally been either stable or improving in recent years. And actually, you see a response of the water birds coming back after we had the declines. So there are hope for improved management in this coastal lagoon, although we have a recent decline again. 4 weeks time, I'll know what the bird days are for this autumn, because the counts are coming in, and we normally use data until November, and that's what we're going to publish somewhere in these proceedings, perhaps at least for the swans. Now, the other fjord I showed you above, Ringkøbing Fjord, same story, small lagoon, big agricultural hinterland. We had 12 square kilometers of Sostra in that area in 1966, more or less the same in 1976, slightly different distributed according to mappings. And then in the 80s, we lost it. This is a famous figure from a paper about brent geese, happened to be written by me. But the story is that this fjord is still, although they monitor a lot of vegetation along transects, it looks okay, there's stability. But the point is, and I'm sorry because of the small numbers I had on this figure, it's not my own, I've stolen it from a colleague, is that you can see the top line there is 20% vegetation coverage of all these. And actually we have quite good evidence that if vegetation coverage of bottom plants goes below 10 to 20%, then it's actually not a feeding habitat any longer, because the birds can't cover their energetic needs because the density of food is too little. It's been documented on brent geese, it's been documented on a couple of other species, Buick swan, for instance, because these 10 to 20% bottom coverage is more or less equivalent to 5 to 10 grams of food per square meter. So this is aside, although there's vegetation, there's not enough vegetation. It's actually seen from the Buick swan's point of view or mute swan's point of view, and non-feeding site. And you can see that if you take These are averages of annual maxima per 6-day period from the 70s until today. We don't have data for that period. You can see that we've lost a huge herbivore community from this coastal lagoon too. And I'm not going to go into that. Now, another example, oh, that's written Danish, some sort of mixed Danish, Danglish example in Nibegølbredninger. It's a very well-known site for us, and we did a paper some years ago in Frontiers in Marine Science where we actually showed the same story. We had a lot of zostra, around 25 square kilometers in the 90s. We had a very severe loss of this zostra around 2001. But actually, we've also seen quite a good, this is not all zostra, but a lot of this dark thing is actually zostra. We have done a photo analysis and actually mapped it later on after this 2014 thing. And the point is that actually also here we see a response after years with very few birds on this inlet. We see birds coming back. So in Denmark since 1990, when we really had a hot political summer because a lot of lobsters were dying in some fjords, and I mean birds can disappear, and no one worries, but the lobsters died that summer. And that actually in 1987 or 1988 caused a huge water quality restoration plan being endorsed by the government. Now we're in plan 4. We're moving forward, and as you can see, there are signs of places that if you actually do something, we've reduced our phosphorus releases from deterrents, or what do you call detergents? Water. What you put in when you wash your clothes in your household. We've reduced our phosphorus releases by more than 90% going out in the waters. But the problem is we have lots of phosphorus sitting out there because we've been putting it out, and it takes 30, if not 100 years to get rid of the phosphorus. We've reduced by activities towards farming communities, the nitrogen release is about 50%. So you can actually do something if you do change things. But I'm sure we're not done with bad examples of habitat losses and so on in our system. Thanks.